I sat by the lake, rod in hand, the early March sun casting a soft glow over the water. The mist rose in lazy curls, and the birds sang their morning songs. My grandfather's old cabin, now mine for 4 months, sat nestled behind me, a quiet retreat from the city's grind. As a software engineer working remotely, I traded traffic and deadlines for this slice of peace. Fishing had become my Sunday ritual, a thermos of coffee steaming beside me as I cast my line into the lake I thought was mine. The Willowbrook Estates, a small HOA development of about 20 houses, sat adjacent to my property, far enough that I figured we'd never cross paths. I was wrong. That morning, the calm shattered. Loud voices cut through the air, and I looked up to see a woman storming toward me, 2 others trailing behind like reluctant soldiers. She was late 30s, blonde hair pulled tight, dressed in workout clothes that screamed money but looked cheap on her. Her stride radiated authority, the kind that comes with a clipboard and a grudge. "Excuse me," she shouted, still a good distance away. "What are you doing in our community recreation area?" I blinked, setting down my coffee. Community recreation area? I was on my land, by my lake. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice calm, "there's been a misunderstanding. This is my property. I inherited it from my grandfather." Her face twisted, lips curling into a smirk that said she wasn't buying it. She planted her hands on her hips. "Your property? This lake is shared community property for Willowbrook Estates residents only. You're trespassing." The 2 behind her nodded, though their eyes flickered with uncertainty. I took a breath, trying to stay polite. "Ma'am, I assure you, this is my land. I have documentation if you'd like to see it." She laughed, a sharp, grating sound that sent birds scattering. "Anyone can claim ownership. Do you have proof right now? Can you show it this instant?" She crossed her arms, daring me to produce a deed from my fishing vest that I gestured toward the cabin. "The papers are in my house, right there. I live here." She shook her head, like I was a kid spinning a tall tale. "Anyone can rent a place and pretend to own it. I'm Ruby Sinclair, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. I know every property owner here, and you're not one of them." The surrealness of it hit me. I was being accused of trespassing on my own land by someone who'd clearly never checked a survey map. "Mrs. Sinclair," I said, still reasonable, "if you'd like to come to my house, I can show you the deed." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm not going anywhere with a stranger who's refusing to leave our property. If you don't leave now, I'm calling the police." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "You're welcome to call them. They can verify my ownership." I thought that would end it. Surely, she'd back down rather than waste law enforcement's time. I was wrong. Ruby pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and without breaking eye contact, said, "Yes, I need to report a suspicious man lurking near homes with children. He's refusing to leave our community property and has been watching our neighborhood. I'm afraid he's dangerous." My jaw dropped. She was lying to the dispatcher, painting me as some predator. The casual way she twisted a guy fishing into a community threat was stunning. I stood there, rod in hand, as she spun her tale, her voice shifting from aggressive to quivering victim. This wasn't about fishing anymore. Ruby Sinclair had just declared war, and she had no idea who she was messing with. Monday morning, Sheriff Hank Bradley knocked on my door. He was middle-aged, face weathered like he'd seen every small-town squabble imaginable. "Mr. Clark," he said, "I got a call about a dispute at the lake. Can you stay away from the area for now to avoid trouble?" I nodded, sensing his exhaustion. "I'll comply, Sheriff, but I'll prove my ownership soon." He gave a tired nod and left, probably hoping this would fizzle out. An hour later, I found a yellow notice taped to my door. "Notice of trespassing on community property," it read in bold letters. "Fine, $200 per day until violation is corrected. Failure to comply may result in legal action." At the bottom, in red ink, second notice will result in immediate police involvement. Ark Sinclair, HOA President. I laughed out loud. Fining me for using my own land? That was the push I needed. I dove into my grandfather's old filing cabinet, pulling out folders of tax records, insurance policies, and, finally, a manila envelope labeled Lake Property. Inside was the deed, dated 1985, stating Benjamin Clark Sr. owned 45 acres, including the lake. But the real shock came with the survey map. My land didn't just include the lake and cabin, it stretched into what I'd thought was empty land. Willowbrook Estates, Ruby's entire HOA, was built on my property that I sat at my kitchen table, hands shaking as I traced the boundaries. I owned their neighborhood. Ruby was living on my land, yelling at me for trespassing. The irony was almost too much. I remembered my grandfather's tense phone calls, his cryptic comment one Christmas about those people at Willowbrook. He'd known. He'd been dealing with this same nonsense. Digging further, I found a 1987 lease agreement. My grandfather had leased the land to a developer for residential housing, but retained ownership of the lake and access rights. The lease could be terminated if violated. Ruby was harassing me on my own property while living on land I technically owned. The quiet life I'd planned suddenly took a backseat to teaching her a lesson. Through my window, I watched Ruby work the neighborhood, gesturing wildly toward my cabin. By afternoon, neighbors who once waved now avoided me. One mother clutched her kids tighter when I checked my mailbox. Ruby's smear campaign was working. She stood on my land, calling me a threat, oblivious to the fact that she had no legal standing. It was like watching someone build a sandcastle at low tide, smug and unaware of the coming waves. That evening, Mrs. Nora Whitman, a sharp 71-year-old who'd lived here before the HOA, showed up with cookies and a grin. "Your grandfather dealt with Ruby's type before," she said over coffee. In '95, she tried this same stunt, patrols, police, the works. He let her make a fool of herself, then invited the neighborhood to a barbecue by the lake. Showed everyone his deed. Ruby went pale when she realized she'd been harassing her landlord. I grinned, picturing it. What happened after? She got quiet, Nora said, eyes twinkling. Your grandfather was patient, but he didn't tolerate bullies. Tuesday evening, Ruby escalated. From my window, I saw her directing an HOA security patrol. 6 residents with folding chairs, clipboards, and walkie-talkies, setting up a checkpoint between my house and the lake. Handmade signs read, "Private community, no trespassing." Ruby barked orders like a general, briefing her team, "If he approaches, don't engage. Document everything and call for backup." Backup? For a guy with a fishing rod? I grabbed my phone, recorded the absurdity, and decided to test them. At 6 p.m., I walked out with my gear, moving slowly toward the lake. Ruby leaped up, waving her arms. "There he is. This is not a drill." Her team scrambled, clipboards ready. "Sir, you cannot pass," she declared, stepping into my path. "This is Willowbrook Estates property." I smiled calmly. "You're right, Mrs. Sinclair. This is private property." She nodded, missing the point entirely. That's when Nora strolled up, cool as ever. "Ruby, dear," she said, "didn't you learn from last time?" Ruby's face reddened. "Mrs. Whitman, this is none of your business. We're protecting our community from an intruder." Nora chuckled. "You tried this with Benjamin's grandfather in '95. How'd that work out?" Ruby sputtered, "That was different." "Was it?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "Seems you're making the same mistake." Some patrol members shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Doubt was creeping in, but Ruby doubled down. "This man is harassing our community. We have every right to defend our space." Her voice rose, rallying her team, but I saw cracks in their conviction that I nodded to the group. "Enjoy your evening." I'll be inside if anyone needs to talk. I turned and walked back, leaving Ruby fuming. Thursday morning, Sheriff Bradley returned, looking done. Mr. Clark, Ruby filed a formal complaint. Claims you violated a restraining order and demands your arrest for trespassing. I raised an eyebrow. There's no restraining order. He sighed. I know. She's wasting our time, but I have to investigate. 10 minutes later, Ruby arrived with 3 HOA members, clutching a folder of evidence, photos of me by the lake, witness statements about feeling unsafe, and a timeline painting me as a stalker. It was a masterclass in delusion. Sheriff Bradley skimmed it, unimpressed. Mrs. Sinclair, I said, pulling out my deed and survey map, this is my land. The lake, the surrounding area, and, fun fact, your entire neighborhood. I spread the map on my porch, pointing to the boundaries. You're leasing this land from me. Your HOA has no authority here. Ruby's face froze, then flushed. This is fake. You forged these documents. Sheriff Bradley studied the deed, then the lease agreement. These look legitimate, Ruby. I'll need to verify, but if they're real, you're on his land. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This is outrageous. We've lived here for years. And you've been leasing, I said. My grandfather never sold the land. Your tenants. Nora, who'd shown up to watch, chuckled. Told you, Ruby. Same mistake, different decade. The other HOA members looked mortified, whispering among themselves. Ruby's authority was crumbling. Sheriff Bradley handed back my papers. I'll confirm this with the county, but it seems you're in the clear, Mr. Clark. Mrs. Sinclair, let's not escalate this further. Ruby stormed off, folder in hand, muttering about lawyers. I watched her go, knowing this wasn't over but feeling the tide turn. The sandcastle was starting to crumble. Over the next week, I had the deed verified by the county. The lease agreement held up too. Ruby's campaign fizzled as neighbors learned the truth, some even apologized for buying her story. At a community meeting I hosted by the lake, I laid out the documents, just like my grandfather had. Most residents were stunned, a few laughed at the irony. Ruby didn't show that I didn't evict anyone. Instead, I sent a letter to the HOA, reminding them of the lease terms and my lake access rights. Ruby resigned as president a month later, moving out shortly after. Nora said she couldn't handle the embarrassment. Now, I fish every Sunday, coffee in hand, no patrol in sight. The lake's quiet again, but I keep the deed handy. Just in case.